Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast.
This is Hannah from Hall Beer Specialists in the Great Western Arcade in Birmingham, and we're the proud sponsors of Daftaboutcraft.
Well, you've just heard there that our sponsorship with Hall the Beer Specialists is back up and running because they've opened a brand new shop right in the middle of Birmingham. Thank you for joining us. This is Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast. We're at episode number 35. This is Dave D here.
And me, Dave B.
And thank you for taking the time to stream or download us. What have we got, Dave? Go on.
We are joined by someone that I found about a year ago on a honeymoon up in Scotland, and that was Simple Things Fermentations. And we have Phil, who is the man behind the Scottish-based outfit, to talk about everything to do with their beer, and probably a bit more than that as well. It's a conversation which isn't actually quite as normally beer-focused, perhaps. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's quite insightful, given the current climate. We've also got a second guest on the podcast this time, and that is Josh from Turning Point, and he joins us for Hype or Tripe. You can probably guess what the beer is, but I'm not going to tell you. You have to stay tuned and find out afterwards. We'll be telling you what we've been enjoyed drinking in our usual feature, Tried and Tested. But we'll kick it all off, the way we usually do, with Brew To Me. Right, Dave, you traditionally kick off this part of the podcast. What have you got for us?
Right, so I have a brewery that are so small, they were a bit worried about whether they could actually send me beer because I wasn't a wholesaler.
Oh, brilliant. Love that sort of thing.
So this is Ogham Brewing. I think I was on Facebook one evening and they popped up and I thought, right, don't recognise that. Dropped them a message on there, had a bit of conversation, explained exactly what I'd like to do with their beers if possible. And they were more than accommodating. I had postal strikes and whatnot to deal with, but then I returned from a week off at work last week and there were 3 of their only beers so far that they've released waiting for me, which is a beer called Infinium, and it's a session pale at 3.6%. Now, the conversations we've had on Facebook Messenger, I don't actually know who I've been talking to, but my guess is I've been talking to Mikey, who is the head brewer and the director of Ogham. As you can tell, very small, very start-up, and they're not actually brewing in their own premises or anything yet. This was brewed at Full Circle. So they're up north. This is Gateshead and obviously Full Circle in Newcastle upon Tyne. So it's that part of the world that we've gone to for this beer.
So they're a completely new setup then?
Yeah. There's so little information about them at the moment. There's a Facebook page and that's about it.
Oh, awesome. I love it when we're getting right at the start with these breweries. It's a vibrant scene up in the Newcastle, in the northeast, so another one joining them. That's awesome. You've got yourself a session pale there. That slots in very nicely with something else we've got coming up, which we didn't mention in the intro there. We've got a little exploration of the...
table beer.
Yes, that's what I wanted to say, table beer. It all, you see, this all slots together very nicely, doesn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't happen by accident sometimes.
No.
So that's actually, I mean, it's what you'd expect in terms of nice and bright, but it's surprisingly full, very, very hazy.
Nice little bit of head, bubble sticking to the side of the glass as well. Nice.
I am battling a bit of a cold, so my taste buds probably aren't quite what they usually are. Definitely Citra. Quite a refreshing nose.
I haven't had a drink for a couple of days, so I could dive straight into that by the looks of it.
Yeah, same. I reckon that's Citra and probably not much else. There might be maybe some Amarillo or something. There's definitely no Simcoe, definitely no Mosaic. This isn't bitter in the slightest. It's very refreshing.
That looks like it's fulfilling the brief on every count then for a session pale.
Absolutely no complaints my end. As you say, it nails the brief. It is a session pale. Very interested to see what they're going to be doing next. And a big thank you for sending us this. And hopefully we'll be having a chat to them in the future.
I hope so. That's a really promising start from them. Ogham Brewery from the northeast. I am going east, but I'm going really east. Keep on going and going and going. I'm going to Russia, which probably isn't a great idea at this current time, but I'm there anyway. I'm in St. Petersburg because I've got a beer from a brewery called Bakunin Brewery, which was founded in 2013, would you believe? So 9 years ago. I found this and I was thinking, well, are these guys still brewing at the moment, given what's happening over there? And Well, their beers have had over 2,500 check-ins in the last month. So, yes, they obviously are still brewing. And they've released over 300 different beers since they began. And they were named after a bar called Bakunin in St. Petersburg, where the three brewers used to meet. The beer I've got is one of their seasonal creations, and it's called Data Pop, and it's a 6%. They describe it as a coconut and vanilla sweet stout. It's a milk stout, essentially. 500ml can.
Where did you find this beer? That's what I'm most interested in. Was it like lying around in the house somewhere?
It was, yeah, it was. Yeah, it was at the back of a shelf. Goodness only knows how long I've had it for. If it was a pale, I probably wouldn't be drinking it, because I feel that it may be well past its expiry date. Well, I know it is in actual fact. We're a bit more lenient with stouts, aren't we? You can get away with a lot more.
I think it's testament to your collecting over the years that you're still able to keep pulling these beers out of essentially shelves or the back of fridges, whereas I have to keep seeking out new ones for every episode.
I think my stash of unknown breweries to me is going to be coming to an end soon. There's not many left, so I might actually have to buy some new beers.
I did that today for the next episode already.
Oh, did you? Excellent.
Yeah.
Right, well, this big coconut hit on the nose smells quite sweet.
What was the other flavour? Oh, vanilla you're supposed to be getting with this as well, aren't you?
Yeah, vanilla. I would say probably because it has been sat at the back of a shelf for so long. This is past its best because there's not a great deal of body there, and I'd expect there to be a lot more.
Is it sort of split almost?
All the flavours are there.
I find if it's done that, the bottom half of the can will have all the good stuff, and you have to sort of...
I need some sort of hand whisk, I think, don't I? Now, I don't make a habit of drinking massively out-of-date beers on this section, but because it was a brewery from Russia, and I thought it would be quite an interesting one to talk about. They describe this beer, like I say, it's called Data Pop, as a silky and memorable milk stout with chocolate notes. The oat flakes give it a smooth texture, complemented by a coconut aroma from the coconut shavings we threw in. Like I say, I think I'm having this past its best, but I've zhuzhed it up a little bit. Let's go in again. All the flavours are there, it just lacks that body. I guess that's probably my own fault for not drinking it sooner.
When was the actual best before on this? I think that's probably the question we all need to know.
It is quite a little while ago.
More than 6 months?
Oh, yeah.
More than 12 months?
Oh, yeah, I think so, yeah. We don't like to throw beer away, do we?
No, this is true. Do you remember the drain pour? That actually doesn't happen very much now, does it? I mean, it used to be a thing, didn't it? People taking, pictures and that of showing their drain pour because the beer was so bad. You don't often...
No, it's very rare I throw something away. It's got to be real awful. Usually if something is really bad, there's actually a reason for it. In this case, my own ineptitude.
Just leaving a beer to gather dust on the back of a shelf.
Got, like I say, over 300 different beers they've produced. Every style you can think of, they've got a beer. Goodness only knows how easy or difficult it is to get hold of their beers at the moment, having said all that. But if you see them, give them a try. Bakunin Brewery from St. Petersburg.
Get in touch with us on Twitter and Instagram at Daftaboutcraft1.
It's time for a guest. We're delighted to welcome along Phil Sisson from Simple Things. Phil, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I'm all right, thanks, considering it's sort of fairly late in the day for me. I'm sort of beginning to flag a little bit, but I'm sure the adrenaline coursing through my veins, thanks to being on a podcast, will keep me awake. Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on.
Are your days long, tiring days of brewing? And we should ask you, are you brewing full-time or you haven't got another job as well?
I work full-time on the brewery and have done, since December 2019. I don't any longer do the brewing. I got my pal Ewan in February last year, was it now, to do that? Yep, it was February last year. So Ewan now does pretty much all the production stuff, very much including the brewing, and most of the packaging. I still help out with the canning and whatnot, and I do everything else. We compare notes on the tastings as we go through the production process, and we very much work out how and what is going to be brewed together. There's only the two of us in the brewery, so it's not difficult to do that. It's pretty much what we do talk about.
And you sort of touched on it there about from December 2019. I believe that's when Simple Things came into being. So how did it all sort of get going?
It was something I've been wanting to do for quite a while, having been a home brewer in London. I had a first career managing recording studios in London. Whilst I was doing that, I was homebrewing, and we, as a family, decided to sell up, move up to Glasgow in 2016, start of 2016. And I then took advantage of the proximity to the Heriot Watt course and did that for a year. And having finished that, went to work for Harveston, and that's where I met Ewan. Ewan was a brewer there. I was there for 2 years. Having done my 2 years there, left and set this up. So yeah, that's kind of how it came about. As I say, it was just me to begin with, and then having done it for a year or so, then got Ewan in to help.
It's really interesting how many brewers we come across who've done the Heriot Watt course.
No, it's quite a popular one, that's for sure. But it definitely doesn't give you everything you need to walk out on the last day and go start your own brewery, that's for sure, which was originally what I had in mind, I think. But one way and another, the timing wasn't right for that. And the couple of years I did working for another brewery that had been well and truly set up, and people there had done lots of practical learning and such things as, well, what's the best way to clean a vessel? And to be able to sort of do that for a couple of years and then take that knowledge with me to do my own brewery, that was hugely helpful for sure.
I was going to say, what's it like making that transition then from being a home brewer to putting everything on the line and setting up your own brewery?
Good question. And, I'll probably give you a different answer to that, depending on, what's going on that particular time. My first career was not too dissimilar in some ways. It's, an industry that people get into for the love of it and then realize it's a pretty difficult industry to make a living in. And I kind of thought, well, yeah, I suppose a brewery is a bit like that, but it's got to be a bit easier than the music industry, right? And I think maybe up until 2 or 3 years ago, it probably was, a little bit. It was perhaps not quite so competitive, but now obviously the whole world's changed, and I don't think it's just brewing that's more competitive. Everything is more difficult to make a living doing anything, pretty much. So yeah, it's fun. It's hugely rewarding. I get to do lovely things and be with great people and create beers that I want to drink and get the satisfaction of them coming out how we wanted them to come out. And then there's the more challenging side of things, which is trying to get onto bars and trying to sell beer generally. Yeah, it's a good old mix of tough stuff and much more fun stuff.
What do people get when they get a Simple Things beer? What was the sort of goal when you started brewing? What did you want to bring to the people?
I was always intending to try to do something a little bit different, insofar as I've always thought that there are a huge range of possibilities with brewing and beer. And yet, when you go into a beer shop or a pub, so much is essentially just different takes on the same beer. So my angle, if you like, was, well, let's look to get to the, explore the edges of that, I suppose, rather than just, let's just do the same thing and do my version of it. It was more about, let's not be quirky or esoteric for the sake of it, but let's explore some of these styles that you maybe don't find so often and try to make a good job of them, make them approachable and enjoyable for people, not so much as a sort of curiosity, but as something that they genuinely want to drink and don't find in any way quirky. So that was the original plan, and still, is a part of the core of the brewery, I suppose, really. But we are constantly evolving things, and I suppose the more difficult that the general industry situation is, the more inclined I am to provide something that is closer to that kind of mainstream thing, because obviously you've got to survive in business. A couple of the ways that we manage to do that are through can conditioning, package. Everything that we do is re-fermented in the package, and I think that helps us to have a recognisable signature, as does the type of water we use. We've got great water here in Glasgow, and I think those two things are a pretty good chunk of what you get when you open a can of our beer. We favour sort of a decent amount of bitterness generally as well. We're not ones for kind of holding back on those things. It's the kind of beer that we like to drink ourselves, and it also does help us, have somewhat of a recognisable stamp, I suppose.
I would agree with that, having had a few of your beers. And the thing I take from it as well as away from your core stuff is I feel like you have got quite a bit of German heritage in what you like as the traditional styles or styles that you want to do a modern twist on.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a conscious decision to look to European brewing heritage, I suppose. Yeah, I wasn't necessarily expecting to have much success with German styles. That's been a real kind of nice thing to have tried a few of those and have them come out the way that they have, because, yeah, I'm really happy with the results as well. The kit that we have is pretty far from fly German style thing. You don't have lots of lovely horizontal fermenters and conditioning tanks or anything like that. So yeah, it's super pleasing that we are actually able to pull off the German styles, because that is an area of brewing that both you and I are pretty passionate about. We enjoy drinking those beers and we really enjoy making them. Yeah.
I think that comes through. And I think as well, that probably does stand out a bit. I sort of think a lot of breweries have a go at one every so often, but you're sort of doing it all year round. So I think you're carving a niche, definitely.
Nice one, thanks. That's really really good to hear. Yeah, definitely. That makes me happy to hear that for sure. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. I mean, what's sort of in the pipeline at the moment then on the beers front? And also, where can people get them?
The shop is obviously always open, and we do send beer various other places that sell it online. We Beer Shop is always my first shout. Neil in Glasgow is a great supporter of ours, and he ships across the UK, I think. Beer Moth in Manchester also been brilliant, more or less, since we got going, and I'm pretty sure they do UK-wide shipping as well, plus lots of other places, actually. And in terms of what we've got coming up, we have got a few more German things happening, actually. We've got a collab with Campervan, and we've got a collab with Schilling, which is a brewery in the centre of Glasgow that have their own bar, both box-style type beers. What else have we got? Ewan next week is doing a pilot of a British strong golden ale, which I'm not sure even is a style that's widely acknowledged. But the plan is it's kind of like a bit lighter and lighter in colour and slightly lighter in ABV than a barley wine. A little bit like a kind of British take on a Duvel is the sort of plan. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that comes out, doing that with English hops. And if it comes out like it is in my mind, then that should be pretty good. Yeah, we've got quite a lot happening actually between now and Christmas. Yeah, lots of interesting bits and pieces coming up.
You're talking about where we can get hold of your beers. Is it a struggle to get your beers further afield?
Yes and no. Sometimes, like anything, I suppose, occasionally you get an inquiry out of the blue, and that's really easy, especially somehow in the north of England. We seem to do really well with people getting in touch with us and saying, we'd love to stock your beers. And then when you actually try and bring that about, it's a struggle. But no, I think all things considered, we do not too bad, really, considering the resources that we have and how long we've been around and all that sort of stuff. And again, the times that we're in, we don't do too bad. I'd love to have more time on it. I do feel like I could pretty much dedicate my whole week to sales and probably not be short of things to do, when actually I have to really try my hardest to make time to do some sales and end up doing, a few hours a week or something. So I suppose the weeks when I get to spend more time on sales is when it becomes easier. And when I end up getting distracted or drawn into other things is when it becomes more difficult.
So you were pouring recently at Rivington's farm trip. What was that like? And was that your first festival?
It was fantastic. It wasn't our first festival. We've done quite a few this summer. This is our first festival season, I suppose, because it just hasn't been happening, obviously. But we've done a pretty good mix of festivals, each one completely different to the last in all sorts of ways. The number, type of people, how lucrative or otherwise it is for us, what you're looking to get out of it, what you're looking to put into it. First one was Brew London, which was September last year. And that was a baptism of fire, having to...
I bet it was.
Get everything from Glasgow to London on my own and do, I think it was 5 or 6 shifts down there, never having done a festival like it really, or any festival before. I'd never even been as a punter, so I wasn't really sure at all what to expect. So yeah, that was fun, but incredibly hard work and a big learning curve. And then we've done completely different ones. We did the most local one to us, a rugby club, which is a stone's throw from the brewery. There was 3,000 people there and 9 breweries. So again, it was mega busy, but we sold loads of beer, got to tell a load of local people that they had a brewery right there that they had no idea about, all sorts of great stuff like that. So it's been a really good year for festival activity, and it's not quite over yet, actually. We've still got a few more to go.
It must be very satisfying watching people drink your beers at a beer festival.
Yeah, that was the thing. The biggest takeaway, actually, from the Brew London one, the first one, was just that, I don't know, I suppose reassurance or validation that this beer that you think is good, and you've had people, I suppose, buy off you and tell you it's good, but there's no substitute for actually putting it into somebody's hand and looking them in the eye, and they've got no vested interest in telling you it's good if it isn't, and to have it come back as a positive thing is hugely valuable. It actually gave me a lot more confidence to speak to people in a sort of sales type way and say, look, actually, I'm really confident that this is a good beer, and be a better salesperson as a result of it, I suppose.
As we're talking to you, I'm drinking your session stout. Session stouts would not be my go-to type of beer. It's going down very quickly. It's very good.
We did a pretty much an imperial stout, actually, and did a few trials. We usually do a few trials when we're doing a new beer of like a 4% one. And one of the trials was really just a sort of small version of the imperial stout with the exact same grain bill, just scaled down. And that came out hands down the one for the sort of 4% version. So yeah, no, it's a popular beer, and we don't have it in stock ourselves right now, but it's on the list of things to get brewed again, I think, before Christmas. We do try to keep a few sort of 3 or 4% things, or at least one 3 or 4% thing available at pretty much all times, partly because that's what I like to have in the fridge most of the time. I like a 6, 7, 8 northwards percent beer, but realistically, I'm not going to have that many of them before I have to go to bed.
Talked about this a bit on the podcast, that tastes are changing and people are going for those lower strength beers.
We probably don't do enough to be able to draw any firm conclusions from that. We really just sort of see people buying what we've got, whatever it may be. But I think as a person outside of a brewery owner, I think I do perceive people going more towards the more session strength type stuff, and understandably so. I suppose for one thing, we've all been big Dipper and Tipper fans for quite a long time, and that just was never going to last forever. So maybe we're just sort of naturally seeing that taper off a little bit.
And talking about higher strength beers and the costs associated with making them and buying them, what's the current financial climate doing to your business?
The jury is out, I think. Still a little bit early to tell. At the moment, it seems okay. At the moment, we're still growing. We're still seeing decent sales. And to be honest, I think it'll probably continue like that through to Christmas. What I'm worried about is what's going to happen after Christmas. But there's a lot of water to flow under the bridge before then, in the political world, I suppose, really. Hopefully they'll get their act together and not just wait until February, March and go, oh, right, now we need to do something, because by then it'll obviously be too late. But yeah, at the moment, it's okay for us.
This might feed probably into that tap. Is that something that is under consideration? Would you what's the direction would you like to take the brewery in?
Yeah, that was always part of the plan for us. And the whole stuff that's going on only sharpens that right up, that's for sure. It would be a great thing to do. And it is something that I'm not exactly beavering away 24/7 on, but it's very much in my mind. I've got, a family, and I want to spend as much time as I can here with them. I don't want to be, manning a bar in Glasgow from Tuesday to Sunday every week, but hopefully there'll be some way of figuring it out, because it would be a great thing to do. And going back to the festival chat, doing that sort of thing just makes you realise all the more that what the advantages of doing it are. The pleasant interactions and the social stuff is part of it, and the having a shop window is great, and the ability to sell directly is great. So that there's tons of advantages, but I am mindful of the limitations as well, that's for sure.
And what's the scene like in Glasgow then? Would a simple things that tap slide in nicely? Is it quite vibrant? We sort of think on the outside looking in that Scotland seems to be getting bigger and better with the amount of beer that's available now in craft beer.
Yeah, it's a brilliant time for beer in Scotland, and Glasgow, I think, is playing its part in that. You know, where obviously Overtone are amazing. The progress that they've made over the last few years is brilliant. There's plenty of good stuff happening in Glasgow. Gareth at Epochals brings some really great beer. He's a really welcome addition to the scene. I think a Simple Things taproom would definitely fit right in. The city is crying out for, well, hopefully Overtone will do it first because I want to go and drink in there myself. Gareth's got his plans underway to do his tap room, and I'd love to think that a Simple Things one might be along not too far behind. And you know, there are others as well, I'm sure, who make great contributions too. It's not by any means oversaturated, that's for sure. There's loads of room for that sort of thing to happen. And I think, you know, the more the merrier, for sure. I don't think we're ever in danger of taking one another's customers away from each other.
I always think that once you've got a couple of breweries, couple of tap rooms, it becomes a destination then, and people will go to all of them, not just pick out one.
There's a sort of critical mass element to it, that's for sure. You know, you want people to be travelling from wherever, Bristol, Newcastle, to come to Glasgow to drink in the pubs and tap rooms, and it's only going to benefit everybody for that to happen. You know, even the independent bars, the specialist places, I'm sure they'll agree that the more quality drinking environments there are here, the better, really.
Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't covered?
I could start on my soapbox about the deposit return scheme, but it's a little bit depressing and dry. But that's due to come in around about this time next year, and it's going to be pretty difficult if it does, that's for sure. You know, we will hopefully have just weathered a pretty tricky storm and be emerging into some slightly more favourable times. It's a great cause that nobody is remotely opposed to, but the way that it's been designed and set up kind of hurts the small independent producers, and it's not yet in any way in synced with a similar sort of scheme which is due to come in England like a year or two later. The whole thing threatens to derail the buoyant scene in Glasgow. So I guess the more people that are aware of that, the better.
How would that impact you?
It's a bit difficult to be precise about it, actually, because it's still not very well defined how it'll work. But there's a deposit which will obviously increase the price. We also have to pay a producer fee, so that increases the price again. Each and every different beer that we produce will have to have two separate barcodes, and they can't just be the cheap barcodes that we use now. They're the sort of special barcodes that you have to pay £150 or something to use. So we'll need one for England, or one for Scotland, and one for everywhere else. There's all that sort of side of things. And then probably the most harmful element of it will be that not only Scottish breweries are having to do this, but any brewery anywhere who wants to sell beer into Scotland will have to do this, which will mean that so many breweries just don't bother. So as beer drinkers in Scotland, our choice is going to be massively reduced, and the feeling of vitality that there is within the industry and the scene at the moment will wither away, I fear, you know. And my great supporters like the Wee Beer Shop will find that he has far fewer beers on his shelf, and it's going to be a pretty grim scene one way and another. So, yeah, it's due to come in, I think, around about this time next year, and the way that it is at the moment, it's not looking very good.
If all of a sudden you're cut off again, it's just going to cut the industry at its knees in Scotland. Having just, like we were saying earlier, it seems really vibrant. You mentioned Overtone, Epochal, and hopefully yourselves having three taps, three really different breweries. Great. And you're getting this scene going. There's loads of other people, and then all of a sudden it's just yourselves, and anything that coming in from England or elsewhere is going to be really hard.
And even the likes of, you know, Vault City or New Barns or Overtone, you know, they are, well, not so much New Barns actually, but the Vault City and Overtone specialise in doing several new beers a month. The way that it's conceived, this scheme, is very much with the kind of macro folks in mind, whereby they really only have a handful of different lines and they set their SKUs up. Obviously, I think Overtone and Vault City are good examples. Each time that they bring out a new beer, all that stuff is going to have to get done in duplicate. One has a say for Scotland and one for everywhere else. So that's going to be immensely expensive in all sorts of ways, and is likely to sort of put a brake on it just at a time when, as we say, things are going pretty well.
Well, the whole thing about craft beer people and craft beer drinkers is we always want the next thing. We always want something new, which is why your Vault Cities and Overtone put out so many beers, because they can sell them. But then this could be a huge dent.
Indeed, absolutely. And I think people have tried to represent that point of view to the organisers, but it so far has fallen on deaf ears. So with any luck, people will listen and people will take notice, and it will get amended in some way. I don't know. But yeah, if it carries on as it is, then it's not going to be so good, that's for sure.
Well, testing time's ahead for sure, but if decent beers get you where you need to be, I think you're well on the way. What I've had so far, it's been great. We wish you all the best.
Thanks very much. Nice one.
Cheers, Phil. Well, I was at Beer Central in Digbeth in Birmingham a few weeks ago, which was very enjoyable. Of course, I had lots and lots of beers. Probably not as many as I would have usually had, but I kept bumping into people who I knew, including Joe from Battle of the Breweries. Had a chat with him, who was saying very nice things about the podcast. I won't repeat them here, but thanks a lot, Joe, for listening to all the episodes and being a really big fan. Good to meet up with you. And somebody else I talked to was the guys from Green Duck in Stourbridge, which is my closest craft brewery, and it's one of their beers that is my favourite beer since our last episode. And it's a beer called Brummy Falls, which was a 9.9% white wine barrel-aged fruited Belgian triple. And you know, sometimes when you have a beer and you think, wow, what's going on here? This is good. This blew my socks off. I wasn't expecting this at all. Really, really good. The Belgian style was there. The white wine was there from the barrel. It was superb. Not sure how easy or difficult that is to get hold of. I fear we won't see it again. I think it was a one-off release, but Brummy Falls from Green Duck, very, very impressive. About you, Dave, what have you been enjoying?
I was actually out in the wild before I got this cold, and I didn't go that far, but I went far enough to go to Ampersand's Brewery Tap in Diss. They have a pub as well in the nearby town of Harleston. And I've been there before, and that's got all of their beers, but this is obviously straight from the source. It's a really good brewery tap, and it's all their stuff on there, more or less. This was the sort of start of Oktoberfest when I went, so they had a lot of lagery stuff. But the best beer they had on tap, and the best beer I've had for a little while, is a collaboration with Three Hills Brewing, and it was a smoked plum Baltic porter. Titanic's plum porter is still and will always be one of my favourite beers, but if I ever want a stronger version of it, then this is the beer to have. Got the plums, got the porter, it was smooth, it was full, the smokiness was there, but it wasn't overpowering, it didn't turn into a Rausch beer or anything like that. It was just a really, really good beer. It was great to have it on actual draft rather than in a bottle or a can. If I can get hold of any, I definitely will. Really good if you like that kind of thing.
Daftaboutcraft. Right, well, every now and again on Daftaboutcraft, we like to throw in a one-off feature. Could be to do with hops, could be to do with styles. On this occasion, it's to do with beer styles, and it is table beers we're looking at. So cue that funky music. I mean, Dave's got a cold, but he's getting with the beat on this one, aren't you, Dave?
I'm so tempted to say white boy when you...
Yeah, exactly. So we have noticed that table beers, they've been around for the whole time we've been interested in the craft scene, but they have surged to more and more prominence recently, haven't they?
We're sort of doing this probably just slightly out of sync seasonally because it's getting darker and people might be starting to think more about porters and stouts. That said, if people are going out and having a night out in a brewery tap or in a bar or something in town, they're going to be looking at those lower ABV beers, which seem to now be everywhere. You struggle to go into a bar and find 2 or 3 dippers or a couple of big stouts on tap now. Instead, what you get presented with often is a lot of 3 to 4 with a couple of 5% pales, and this sort of style has just risen and increased in popularity probably in the last year to 18 months, I'd say.
Yeah, I think people's tastes are changing. We've mentioned this a few times on the podcast. People often now prefer to drink lower ABV beers, and the cost implication as well, actually, will have an effect on people drinking the weaker beers, especially with our mortgages and gas bills and electricity bills and all the rest of it going up. If we can afford to drink, we'll probably be going in at the lower end of the scale.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I know now when I'm looking for beers, the ABV doesn't put me off too much, but that said, I'd say my fridge has definitely increased in having those lower ABV beers, but that's also because of how they taste now. It was a case, it felt like certainly 2 years ago, there was a big uprise in these beers, these sort of core 4% IPAs and things, but all they would do is have an initial hit of hops and then taste of very, very little. But the process for brewing these has obviously been refined, and brewers are sort of taking care with them. And the end result is we've now got a lot of low ABV table beers and session pales, which actually are exactly what they should be and very enjoyable to drink.
So we've got a selection between us. How many have you got there?
I've got 2.
I've got 3 or 4, so I'll pick 2 of those. Now, your first one is king of table beers in many respects.
Yeah, I thought if we're going to do a table beer section, you can't do that without having the beer which sort of birthed them all almost, which is from the Colonel. Who else? Whenever we talk to any brewers, if they don't mention the Colonel in discussions, it's a surprise. Their table beer is 2.9%, so we're really down on the ABV scale. But I remember this beer, they've been brewing this for a long time.
2012, in fact. It was one of the first beers they brewed. They're 10 years old now.
I didn't realise it was that long. I would not have imagined this has been going 10 years. That's incredible. I think they've done a few different iterations, because I know I've had it slightly stronger in the 3%, but I don't know that I've ever had it at 2.9. And this has got Mosaic and Centennial in it.
So the sort of table beer style, I often wonder, because you get small pales and session pales and table beers, and a table beer has to slot in between 2.8 and 3.8%.
That's the definition, is it?
Yeah, so that's why you then get small pales and session pales. They just fit outside of that usually.
Okay. Now, I might be miles off, but I think of a table beer, and I think it originated on the continent as well.
It was Belgium, in fact.
Because I remember years ago when I was subscribing to, I can't remember which box it was, subscription box, and one of the beers that came through that month was a table beer, and it stood out even back then as something that was very enjoyable and different.
I mean, the actual style in Belgium goes back a long, long, long way. Table beers were traditionally made with spent grains of stronger brews, the leftovers, if you want, which is
sort of recycling almost.
Yeah, which is why they were so low in strength. People would drink them after a busy day at work, and they wouldn't get intoxicated, this sort of thing. And they were often only around 1% at that time. So
wow.
So it was like drinking water, really, but with a little bit of a kick.
Well, this is brilliant, as I would expect it to be. Now, because it's got Mosaic and it's got Centennial, it's actually got it's bitter, but it's not that bitter. So it sort of lingers in your mouth a bit.
Mm-hmm. That's
a bit like if you'd had a busy day and you just want to chat, and it's like, oh, okay, and it just makes you keep going back. But
so it's very much in the style of those original table beers.
Definitely, there's definitely a continental influence on that one, because there's no fruitiness to it. It's very clean and crisp, and it's just slightly bitter, but it lingers around enough, but you just sort of think, oh, yeah, wouldn't mind going back to that quite quickly. It'd be great with food, great with crisps, first beer if you went in a bar, and especially if you're on the continent.
I have got Pressure Drop Petanque.
Which I've actually had.
Oh, excellent. 3.5%. Now this is just cryo-mosaic in this. Mango, strawberry and pine notes I should be getting. And what is fascinating is that I remember first having table beers a few years ago, and like you say, they were just a little bit sort of watery, but there's so much flavour in these beers now.
This is it.
To me, it tastes like there's something else in there, because it's quite dry at the end, a bit in the same way that yours is. Now, I've got to ask you this while we're having a beer. You know when you went to Ampersand?
Yes.
Did you get any dairy products?
No. I did make a fool of myself asking the barman if they had any dairy products.
We'll tell you the story. I was told by my wife that Ampersand, during lockdown, started to do a range of butter and cheese and what have you. So I said to Dave, if you go into the Ampersand taproom, you've got to check this out, get us some. So he went along to the bar there and asked about it, only to get a very blank look back from the barman. And after a bit of Googling, we realised that Ampersand does do dairy products, but it's a different Ampersand.
It's just someone in, I think it was Sussex or something, their brand is also Ampersand.
And it's also black and white branding.
I can see where the sort of confusion would have come from. But sadly, no dairy products, just a lot of good beer. The food that was on offer there came from a food truck, and it was some of the biggest food I've ever seen. It was great, don't get me wrong, but my goodness, we couldn't finish it. That was good mood food. So if you're there, I'd suggest whatever they've got on if you're there on a weekend and they're there, share whatever the offerings are, because you'll do well to manage it all on your own.
Now, what's your other beer, your second table beer?
Well, the second table beer I have is Scoff from Drop Project.
But a few Drop Projects feature on the various sections on the podcast.
It shows, I think, they're quite good at covering a lot of styles. So again, I get to know what hops are in, which is great. And this one is Simcoe and Cascade. I've got 2.8 now.
Oh, you're right on the cusp then.
So this is the sort of, if it had been any weaker, it could not be classed as a table beer.
So Cascade here, I'm going to guess this has got another sort of dry end to it, which is a bit of a thread throughout the three beers we've got here.
Quite a lot drier, actually. Fair bit of Cascade. Now, the thing I would say with this, compared to the Colonel, this one is just starting to taste watery. And I appreciate that's probably going to be a job.
It's that lower end of the scale, isn't it? That's why. One of the beers that stands out to me that I had was from Wildflower in Australia. And they do a table beer, which is a mixed firm table beer. And my goodness, there's a lot going on in that. I think I had that last year.
I remember that, yeah.
That was absolutely tremendous. We had a message as well from one of our listeners, David Forrest, who says, talking about table beers, that if you've not had it, he says, you need to try Big Natty from Mash Gang and Fierce. It's 2.5%, West Coast Table IPA. Actually, if it's 2.5%, you could argue that's not quite a table beer. David says it's the best low ABV beer he's had. And they also do one called Infinity Pool, but he prefers Big Natty. So I did have a little look to see if I could find one locally, but I couldn't. Big Natty from Mash Gang. But if you see it, give it a go. Now, my second one, I've got three to choose from. One of them I've already had on another occasion, which was from Infinity, who were on the podcast some episodes ago. That was their first table beer. That was excellent. I've got two left here. I've got an Anspach and Hob Day and a Burning Sky. Which one shall I go for?
I would go for Anspach and Hob Day because we've definitely not had them on. And they're a little bit like the Colonel in that they're very rooted in tradition. And I remember having some of their beers, or one of their beers, a few Christmases ago. And it was a traditional porter and it was very effervescent. And I did not like it. But I have noticed of late, their stuff is popping up more and more and more.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to see what you make of that.
Well, before I open it, the hops are quite interesting because this is Jester and Hallertau Blanc.
So Britain and Germany. Oh, that's very interesting.
And they've got a little bit on the side of the can here about table beers. They say that table beers are in vogue today, but this sessionable style has been sustaining drinkers for centuries. Our blend of Jester and Hallertau Blanc hops give flavours of lemon, lychee and spice. American ale yeast and Pilsner malt lend a clean, fruity character, while the low ABV keeps it light, fresh, and effortlessly drinkable. And it's 2.7%.
Ooh, so technically not.
Oh, interesting.
So there's definitely some playing around with...
There is, around the bottom end of the ABVs there. So you thought your previous one there from Drop Project was going a bit watery. Let's see if this one is.
Yeah, unfortunately for Drop Project, probably following the Colonel was always going to be a tough task, and it just doesn't really match up very well. I think even if I'd have had that in isolation, I'd be a little bit disappointed.
Oh wow, that's very different to the previous one. And I think this harks more to the continental roots of a table beer, most definitely.
So is it quite fruity?
It's kind of fruity, spicy and dry.
Genuinely spicy, because I liked the sound of that when you said it had spice.
Oh,
I
definitely.
thought that was really interesting.
It's a little bit of warmth and a little bit of a kick to it.
I like the sound of that.
I think you would like this. I must say hi to Jason, who listens to the podcast. He loves it when we pour the beers into the glass and he hears the fizzing sound. So that one was for you, mate.
The question I wanted to ask you while we were doing this, I thought of this earlier. Do you think, and I suppose there is an answer already, but do you think, because we've seen this rise in this style, that we might see a lower version of a darker beer? So you could start seeing porters coming down in strength, which is technically heading to a mild, but that's not quite the same. But do you think there could be a sort of darker table beer almost?
I didn't know this, but table beers, they're not just necessarily yellow or orange. You can have a dark table beer, for example.
Well, there's a challenge to any brewers in the UK, etc. Because I've not seen one. I don't know about you.
No, I haven't. That's why I didn't really realise they existed till I did a little bit of research. So anybody fancy brewing one, we'll throw it out to you. Give it a go.
My enjoyment of milds is documented on the podcast. But that said, I don't think of a mild as a table beer or the dark equivalent of a table beer. I think they're completely different entities. So I think there's scope to try and do something. I'm actually going to Belgium at the start of December, so I'm definitely looking for table beers, because I don't think whenever I've gone out in Belgium I've actually found any, which is strange.
I bet you do this time.
I hope so, and if there's a dark table beer I'll be sure to report back.
Talking about Belgium just got me thinking about food and beer. I went to a place in Birmingham called The Wilderness recently for a 6-course tasting menu it was, and I noticed while I was there that they were advertising a 3-course menu with which they were pairing 3 different Belgian beers.
Oh, very nice.
So I thought, yes, I'm going to get that. I'm going to go to that. All sold out. Couldn't get a ticket.
No.
But I remember ages ago you said on this podcast that food and beer were the next big thing, and there you are. Really good restaurants already starting to cotton on to this.
Following on from that, I noticed today from the brewery, which shall remain nameless until episode 36, that I'm doing for Brew To Me, underneath on the little, this is the beauty of like finding these breweries and then like signing up to the mailer, forgetting about it, and then an email comes through and like, oh, I haven't got any of their beers yet. Right, I'll do an order. And anyway, part of their mailer was they were doing a tasting night of their beers with cheese.
Obviously, avid listeners of the podcast at Christmas time.
Which, as I was going to say, we are very much planning on doing another beer and cheese themed Christmas special. That said, if there's something you'd rather we tried to pair beer with as some alternatives to cheese, do let us know. We'd happily try and incorporate some different things.
Yeah, we were talking about trying to extend the theme a little bit and not just have cheese, but have other things. Any ideas, do let us know. But I think from our little tour of table beer world, it seems to me here that we got 4 beers, all around 3%, which were all very different.
Yes, I could drink this Colonel one, not all day, every day, but a lot of days. And certainly as that, you said it earlier, when you come back, first beer after a day's work or something, this is the one to have rather than a 4 or 5% pale or something. There's nothing wrong with that, obviously, but increasingly, I think if I had a fridge full of these, I wouldn't be disappointed every time. Sadly, the Drop Project one, probably not their finest work, to be brutally honest. It's okay. But then you've had probably 2 that have been at quite different ends of a taste spectrum, even within...
Yeah, 2 beers of the same style that tasted completely different, largely due to the hops involved there. Yeah, the Pressure Drop one, that went down very, very easily. I could drink that as fast as you wanted, not that I condone drinking fast, but it went down very well. Ants Patch and Hob Day one, probably I would say more for you than for me, but a lot going on there. It just shows you what depth of flavour you can get even when the beers are under 3%. Quite incredible, really.
Yeah, and I think the sort of thing we would take away from this is we're already converted, but if you're not, or you sort of see them and think, oh, that's going to taste of absolutely nothing, 9 times out of 10 should now and will now. I think now breweries have refined it so well that table beers are here to stay and are very, very good value as well.
You're listening to Dave B and Dave D on Daft About Craft, the craft beer podcast.
Right, well, we are joined by the brewer's wife again. Welcome to the podcast, Sam from Copper Beach.
I'm back.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Good. What are we going to talk about this time then?
Well, you know, there's a hot topic on everyone's lips at the moment, isn't there? And that's like the cost of living crisis, inverted commas, but it's very real to a lot of people currently. So I thought we could have a little discussion about that.
So we're all worrying about gas and electric prices going up at home, and those of us whose fixed-term mortgage rates are just about to come to an end, we're all thinking, oh God, what's going to happen? But for people running businesses and small breweries, it must be doubly worrying because you've got things at home to worry about and the business side of things. So how's that affecting Copper Beach?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I can't lie. It is having an effect. Those who do know our story know that we waited a very, very long time to get into our commercial property, coming out of the little shed at the bottom of the garden. So much so that when the kind of spreadsheet, again, anyone who knows Dan loves a spreadsheet.
Does love a spreadsheet.
But when the initial spreadsheet of costings and also, you know, everything that comes with having a commercial property was done, the budget for gas and electric was sort of probably less than half of what it now costs. So, you know, having moved in at quite a pivotal time in that market, saw those costs suddenly rise, which means that, you know, that has a knock-on effect with the affordability of everything else. And we're not the only business in this position, and particularly breweries, you know, it takes a lot of energy to make beer and store beer particularly.
So what's the effect of all this on Dan when he's trying to juggle a job and home life and the brewery as well?
It's hugely negative. You know, I can't lie. I love to put positive spins on things. That's just me as a person. But This is one of those things that, you know, even the perpetually positive person really struggles to find anything. You know, mentally, it's very draining. Not only having that worry of, like you say, everybody's got that worry about their home, how they're going to heat their home for the winter and what the best solutions are for that. But yeah, when you've got to consider that for a business as well, especially when it is becoming your main source of income, it's taking its toll, really. And it's just about being clever and making switches and figuring out what it is you can do. Anything that is within your control, you kind of have to face head on and do anything you can. But a lot of it's out of your control.
What have you done to sort of offset some of these potentially increased costs?
Well, I think the first thing we had to do is figure out how much it costs just to have the brewery stand still. You know, before you've even gone in and done anything, how much does it cost just standing still? Which, you know, Dan went and figured that out. Again, there's not huge amounts that you can do because you have to store the beer and you have to store it at a temperature. You have to brew X amount of times to meet your stock demands. You have to can it, or, you know, whatever that is. So there are certain things you can't control. But Dan has this huge thing at the moment. I think he read or heard on a podcast this concept of sweating your assets.
Right.
So just basically making the most of what you've got and trying to be clever with what you've got. So things like our cold room is actually at the moment bigger than what we need. Mm-hmm. So we've discussed potentially walling some of it off. Then the sort of the chiller doesn't have to work as hard.
Got you,
So that's going to bring back, you know, because that's kind of the most costly thing.
Because that's running 24 hours
24/7, yeah. And obviously in the winter, when it's colder, we probably won't need to use it as much, if at all, depending on the temperature outside. So that's probably going to help. So it's just highlighting and trying to pinpoint little things that you can control.
It's a bit like when we go around the house and we're switching off all our plugs and stuff to try and save a few pennies here and there. It's the same sort of thing, but on a bigger scale, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I know when you have the discussion at home, it is a bit like, oh, well, you know, can we turn this off or take this off standby? And when you look at it, you probably are talking about pennies. It's probably not going to make a huge dent at all. But, you know, a lot of it's about feeling like you.
I think the media frenzy has got people thinking, you know, you can't waste any tiny amount of power at the moment. You've got to switch everything off. You know, when our heating comes on here, I'm sort of thinking, oh, should we really have the heating on? Can we afford this? It's ridiculous, really. But I think the media is responsible for a lot of this, whipping people up into this condition where they think that, you know, the whole world's going to end if we're not careful.
Absolutely. And I think I am one of those people who's just like, oh, it'll be fine. There'll be a solution. Yeah. It won't really be as bad as they say it'll be. No. But the longer it's going on, the more you kind of have to accept that actually we are in a bit of a crunch at the minute, and everybody's is making cutbacks. But then the knock-on effect that then has as a business is there's less people who are going to buy beer.
Yeah, we've been talking about this on the podcast. Ultimately, if prices of everything go up, people have got less disposable cash to spend on beer. But I guess at some point the prices of your beer will have to go up a little bit because your raw ingredients are going up. That price has got to be passed on somewhere down the line, not just you, but all breweries.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing about that with our personal situation is that because we're now a slightly larger operator, well, I say slightly, double the size, if not more than we were before, there's a bit of economy to scale now with ordering ingredients, etc. And so where it might be more difficult for a larger brewery who's already been up and running for a long time, we might balance out a little bit between the rising cost. And we also had a bit of a blinder with the announcement that came out about the cap for businesses.
Yes.
And we had signed our energy deal at the end of April.
Right.
So we're actually paying, I think it's about half what we originally signed up for, and fixed at the end of April. So we were incredibly fortunate to finally get some relief from news. One of these announcements that often pass many people by. And I know a lot of businesses who signed their deals before April the 1st, it hasn't really helped them at all.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of positives in our personal situation, but it's not much comfort to the businesses that have missed out on that.
As for Copper Beach at the moment, you've got all these things going on with the energy and everything, but Dan has recently been busy with new recipes, so that must be a bright light for him.
It's very exciting. It's been a bit of a shame recently because obviously, as you know, we had our baby and the business had to take a little bit of a hit because of everything we've had going on in life and just sort of getting the unit up and running. And he sort of almost lost the passion for it a bit and kind of forgotten why he was doing it in the first place. And that was because he really enjoys brewing beer.
I guess this must happen with a lot of breweries when they make that transition from small to a little bit bigger and there's other things going on in their life. They get consumed by it all and forget that they actually really enjoy the brewing side of things as well.
The focus has to shift sometimes. That's inevitable, but it does take away from the thing that gets you into it in the first place. So I think he's got this new lease of life now. He's bought a piece of brewing equipment called a grain father. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like I think it's like a one pot sort of, no, he'll kill me for saying this, Wayne. I'll definitely have got this wrong. But it's something he can do smaller, more experimental batches of beer on without using as much energy as using the larger kit. He was sort of like, I bought this and I'm going to try X, Y and Z. So we've got some limited edition and some experimental batches that are going to be coming out soon, which is mega exciting. Yeah.
Any clues to what's going to come out?
Well, it's winter, so obviously the beers are getting darker, the nights are getting darker, and the beers are going with it. So, I think there's going to be some nice dark beers coming through. Talk of smoked flavours somewhere, nice. And definitely think sort of bonfire night and.
And talking of bonfire night, actually, it's a nice little segue because you've managed to be asked to operate a pop-up tap at one of the big bonfires in your area.
Yeah, we're going to be at Himley Hall on bonfire night, which is a huge event.
It's a massive thing sort of in these parts, isn't it?
We're not quite sure whether we've bitten off more than we can chew, but we're certainly going to go for it and see what happens.
I know you through your cans, but you're getting out there more and you're doing events and showcasing your beer to people, and it's all about changing. You've got to keep changing your model, haven't you, to keep surviving. I think that's what you and Dan have found out.
For sure. I mean, we are only in can really because of the pandemic. That wasn't the original plan when Dan decided to go for it commercially. Can wasn't the plan at all, but like you say, you segue into different avenues because you're forced to. This is kind of moving a little bit more back to where we thought we would be initially, which is, we love can. The cans look great. We've really enjoyed that way to market, but it's definitely time to explore all the different avenues for us now.
So there are positives to be found in the negatives. That's what we're saying here.
I will never not believe that because otherwise you just wouldn't get through the day, would you? Like you say, if you look for them hard enough, they're sure to be there somewhere.
And now it's time for hype or tripe.
Well, it's the time of the podcast where we get a beer that's doing the rounds, it's really popular, that people are talking about, saying good things about it, and then we see whether it really does live up to the hype and whether it's hype or tripe. And this time, there is only one contender, Dave, isn't there? It's everywhere, this beer.
Yeah, we've probably hamstrung ourselves as well, really. I don't know if this is going to be the most unbiased review of the beer, which you'll soon find out why. But
the reason being is we're joined by Josh from Turning Point, and the beer is Palpatine from Turning Point and Emperors, so I hope we like it. I've seen some amazing reviews for this. People I know, people on Untapped, everybody's saying it's great, and it seems that no matter whatever Damien from Emperor's touches, it seems to turn to gold, so you can surely do no wrong with this beer.
I'd like to think so. I think some people might not know what's going on with it because there's so much going on, but I'm pretty sure that they'll like it.
Well, just to put people in the picture, this is a peach, plum and charred nectarine beach smoked imperial stout, and it's 12%. What on earth possessed you to make a beer like this?
So me and Damien have been talking about making a beer together for years, and finally we found a time slot that suited both of us, and we absolutely wanted to make a fruited imperial stout. Yeah, and I think those flavours complement each other really well. I wanted it to be more than just fruit, so I wanted a little bit of the beech smoked malt, a bit more complexity. We put more fruit in than we've ever put certainly into a stout before. We did the largest Emperor's collaboration that Damien's ever done, 4,000 litres of it. So it was 116 bags of malt over a double mash over 2 days. Quite a behemoth of a beer.
And we talk on the podcast quite a bit about how collabs work, but when Damien does a collab, he's there, he's getting right involved, isn't he? We've all seen his pictures on Instagram and all over the socials. He's getting well stuck in.
Yeah, absolutely. So he has a full-time job on top of his brewing. So most of his brews actually happen on Saturdays, which is quite unusual for a working full-time brewery such as ours. But it gives us an opportunity to try it while the tap room's open. So it's really nice for people to see it, to see us make a beer in person while they're there drinking. And also it gives me and Damien an opportunity to go out into Leeds city centre after the brew day, which is exactly what we did.
Oh my God. How did that go?
As good as you can imagine.
Yeah, I can imagine. Right, Dave, you've just opened yours. I'm going to open mine.
The one thing I wanted to ask, Dave asked about the collab side of things, but what was the thinking with nectarine?
So nectarine, plum and peach are all relatively similar within the fruit groups. And so what we did was actually combine lots of different textures within the same beer. The peach is all puree, so it's a huge quantity of peach puree. Alongside that is plum juice. But then the nectarines are actually real nectarines, fresh fruit, that we literally charred with a blowtorch and then put them into the beer. So it's like to get the three different types of this, stone fruit in three different formats, all within the same beer.
And what sort of quantities of fruit are we talking about as well?
I mean, there's a 4,000 litre brew. You're talking probably about 500 or 600 litres of fruit content within that.
Wow.
This is the sort of content we love. We love to find out how much of everything is in a beer. So this is really interesting for us. Those are huge quantities, aren't they?
And it smells like it as well.
Oh,
it smells. Yeah. You can smell huge quantities of fruit on there.
Yeah, the plum really comes through, absolutely. And it even comes through slightly in the colour if you turn it to the light.
Well, I've just had a sip. Well, I can tell you in one sip, this lives up to the hype. Goodness me, that is good.
I'm very pleased to hear you say that, especially after one sip, because I always find, especially with imperial stouts, that your taste buds adapt, and even through the different temperatures as you drink it, you get different flavour profiles as well.
First thing I get, a little bit of sweetness. That's really nice. I'm not used to getting that sweetness in a imperial stout. That's lovely. What about you, Dave? What are you getting?
Yeah, I'm with you. I get the sweetness. I get peach and I get plum, and then I think at the back end the nectarine comes through, maybe with the smokiness. I'm definitely getting used to it a bit. I don't know if you find it, Josh. Sometimes big stouts can taste slightly medicinal, and they just have to settle down a bit.
Yeah, I think some of them have like a tannic quality, like a red wine in that circumstance where you do need them to settle a little bit and your taste buds to adapt to them as well.
Yeah, the first bit I got, it was really fruity.
Out of interest, Dave, has yours been in a fridge at all or not?
Nope. No, I purposely didn't put it in a fridge. It's been room temperature since it arrived.
I persuaded Josh to go and get a can as well. I say persuaded, he didn't need a great deal of persuasion, in all honesty. But you have obviously drunk this several times before, and you have also had it on cask as well. You were there at the cask launch.
Yeah, so what's really good about this is actually the first time I've had it in can.
Oh, really? Excellent.
Yeah. So I was there at the Tap in Derby Brewing Company's Tap House. A good friend of mine runs that pub now. and he did a fringe event for Derby BeerCon Beer Festival, where there was 6 Turning Point beers and 6 Northern Monk beers as a bit of a versus. And my good friend Matt from Northern Monk came down as well, and there was lots of other brewers there, which was really nice to see. So Mike from Cult of Oak and Tom and Josh from Neon Raptor and Damien himself came down from Emperors briefly as well to see the beer launched with me. Yeah, and having that in cask was phenomenal. I love Imperial Stouts in cask. I think you get so much body and so much depth of flavour. And then, the next day at Derby BeerCon, I was pouring the keg to everyone, and other than the people that had it at the cask launch the night before, that was the first time anyone tried it. So that was really interesting as well.
How did keg and cask compare?
You get the usual comparisons and differences.
Yep.
Cask tends to have a bit more body to it, especially when poured through a sparkler, and it's different temperatures as well when it's poured. But the main thing that was interesting for me is that in keg, I think probably the carbonation is what's causing a slight larger quantity of tartness from the fruit. So the plum on cask comes through just really smoothly alongside the rest of the beer, whereas on keg it's got that slight sort of tartness from the fruit contrasting with the beer rather than complementing it. But it's still really good thing to have in the beer.
And how does it compare again then to your first taste of it in can as well?
Can and keg I always find are mostly the same, but yeah, I'm equally happy with the can, and as I go through it, I'm sure I'll have more comments as well.
I've just gone in for sort of sips 2, 3 and 4. I thought the first one was good. It actually, for me, is getting better and better the further down I go. When you say to somebody, when you mention a 12% Imperial Stout, their first thing is to think it's quite thick and gloopy, but this is not at all. It's. I don't want to use the word thin because there's so much going on, and it's not as thick as you might imagine, but that is not a problem in any way whatsoever.
I think rather than using like thick and thin, because I do think this has quite a lot of body. I think it's quite a thick beer, but I think the thing it's not cloying. It's not too rich. It's not too sickly. It's not too cloying. It's actually quite gentle in its flavour profiles, considering its percentage and body. So it becomes, for want of a better word, sessionable.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
12% stout.
A lot of these stouts, they are so stickily sweet. You know, it's hard to. You don't want to go back to it, but this is drawing me back in.
Yeah, it doesn't sit like, say, an Amundsen or something where you do. No. You can sort of see it going up the side of the glass every time you have a couple of sips, and it gets longer and longer to get through it. I think you've sort of almost created a new genre of like fruit imperial stout.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're the first, but I do like the idea that ours is. I think this is quite refined. We do make sweeter, more desserty style imperial stouts than this we have done in the past. Equally, we make more traditional imperial stouts too, but I feel like this sort of falls down in the middle between those two, and it's really out there in terms of its ingredients, but at the same time, it's quite balanced, quite refined. It's not, as you said, sticking to the side of the glass. It's not just like half sugar.
It's not a dessert stout, is it? That's the real difference. I think when people think imperials now, because of Amundsen and people like that, but the thing is, it's either going to be big and coffee, or it's going to be very sweet, trying to do some sort of sweet shop ice cream flavour.
I tell you what is nice is that absence of coffee, because it's quite hard these days to have any sort of stout really without there being some sort of coffee going on in there.
Yeah, I mean, you tend to have coffee notes coming through from different malts, malt additions within the beer themselves. We actually make a beer called Gravediggers Biscuits, which really falls into that category. It's an espresso martini stout, so that's got the coffee flavours coming through from the malt, but then also we do the cold brew addition into the beer. That's one of my favourite beers that we do. And this, as you said, this is completely the other end of the spectrum from that, even though they're both imperial stouts and they're both quite decadent in different ways.
Having got you here, it's only right to ask what's going on with Turning Point. I think one of the things for us when we first started doing this podcast was Cameron and yourself being around and doing so much tasting and talking about the beer, and it really sold Turning Point. And I think you're both excellent at selling the beers, so it's only right to ask what's going on with Turning Point. Like, what have you got coming up? Because you'll make them all sound amazing, which is always really interesting.
You've got a lot to live up to now, because they've all got to be as good as this.
You know, equally the same as lots of other breweries at this point in time. We're all trying to push as much as we can. We're all doing what we can within the market, but at the same time, it's not quite what it was before COVID. We're all a little bit tentative. maybe not going hell for leather and gung-ho as much as we would have been 3 years ago. But at the same time, we're constantly trying to innovate and expand. We've got a much more in our barrel aging project at the moment. We keep adding more and more barrels to that and getting more and more within our what we call our Singularity series, where we do single barrel releases solely into numbered cans. So they're really limited edition beers that we can experiment with. And then, on top of that, we keep progressing with our best-selling beer, Disco King, at the moment is just flying out. We get more and more permanent lines of that every day, and that's that pays the bills, and we're really happy with it. We're expanding, new floors, repairs. We need a new boiler at the moment that we're looking to get. We need some more cold store space. So everything's moving in the right direction, and we're just trying to adapt as a small business and see what we can do to help with that. More collaborations on the line as well. We've got one coming up with, we just did one with Neon Raptor last week. We've got one coming up with Thornbridge, one with Northern Monk in the next few months, which will be really interesting. Yeah, and then a side project from that is Cameron and Aaron, our owners, are taking back a pub in York called the Falcon, which Cameron used to manage, and then it closed down. It's been closed for years, and they're going to bring it back in the next month or two.
Oh, wow.
It won't officially be like a Turning Point tap room, but it'll certainly have Turning Point beers in there, and it's going to be a brilliant pub. It looks gorgeous from what I've seen so far. Yeah, it's all going in the right direction for us. We're really happy. Sales are as good as I could hope for at the moment, given the current climate.
Well, talking about that current climate, I'm going to have to ask the question. Presumably, you've had horrible gas and electric estimated bills and all this sort of stuff, like so many people we see have. It must be a worrying time for the business.
It's a blessing and a curse being the size that we are. We're quite a small brewery still. We only have 9 full-time employees, and when those things come, it's we're not the sort of business that has a huge cash flow to fall back on, huge savings or anything. But equally, we are the size that we are, which means that we can be very adaptable. And as COVID showed, small independent businesses and, from our perspective, breweries within the scene changed like on a dime, absolutely changed their entire business plan overnight and were successful in it. And we were one of many that adapted in a positive way. And breweries may have to do that again over the coming months.
Beers like this, there was a point where everyone would knock out an Imperial Stout. Are they now becoming a bit more, you've got to pick and choose when you want to do them rather than just thinking, what should we do this month? Let's do an Imperial.
I think so, yeah. A little bit of that, a little bit of making sure you're not holding too much stock all at the same time, just in case, all the pubs shut down or anything, things like that. Like that, I think a lot of breweries learned to be a bit more careful with their payment structures, accounts receivable, so that they can make sure they've got enough cash flow in order to run the business. I think people need to be, breweries are being more careful with what beers to release and when, absolutely. But at the same time, we're all in this industry to develop the beer scene, we want to innovate, we want to try new things. Our brewers don't brew because they have to. They brew because they really want to try and experiment with new things. So, we'll have to see how it goes.
We've talked about some serious stuff there, but that brings that nicely round back to this beer. I've kept drinking that while you've been chatting away, and it gets no more sweeter, which I really enjoy. All the flavours stay the same. They don't get any less or more intense, which is great. You get your profile and it stays. I really like that. The smoke malt comes in and out a bit for me. Sometimes I get a bit more of it, sometimes I get a bit less. But it's just such a different take. I think that's what I love the most about this. I'd sort of say, I don't know, I wouldn't want to put words in Damien's mouth, but it feels like one of the most different beers he's done as well, almost.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of in the collaboration, in the sense that I absolutely know that Damien makes some incredible Imperial Stouts, but just like the current trends, a lot of them are extremely sweet, extremely dessert style Imperial Stouts. So I think when I first, when we had our first conversation where we actually had a date nailed down, one of the first things I said is I don't want to make that. I want to make something a little bit more left field, a little bit more interesting, that stands out from the pack a little bit more. And yeah, as I just said, the reason that we do this is to innovate and to have fun. And this is certainly one of those beers where we're just trying to push our boundaries, see what we can do, but hopefully come out with something that everyone enjoys.
You've kind of restored my faith in the Imperial Stout Star, because so many I've had in recent months, they're just too sweet for me. They're all right, but they're just too sweet, and I can't drink much of them. And they all start tasting the same, but this is completely different to any other imperial stout I've had.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a really nice compliment to be, for someone to say that it's completely different to all of the others, but in a good way.
Yeah,
100% is.
I'm sloshing through this quite quickly, and it's probably inadvisable given the 12%. But
yeah, I can't wait for the 12% to hit me in about half an hour's time because I've nearly gone through it, which is unusual with a big beer as well.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, there's a good reason we're both flying through this, and that is good.
It's all been quite sort of overwhelming logistically because it's out in the open now and everyone's trying it and it's got hundreds of check-ins already. But to me, because it's sort of our own hype as a brewery, plus the hype of doing an imperial stout, plus the hype of Damien making it as a collaboration. It was 95% sold out before we'd even packaged it. Yeah, I put some aside for our web store and tap room, but yeah, I think I've got half a dozen kegs left out of the full batch. All the cans have sold except for the ones that we've reserved for the web store. So it's going really well. The 9-gallon casks, they're going to be reserved for something that we started doing earlier this year, and we're going to try and do it every year, which is our Imperial March, which is a great name considering it's an Emperor's beer. In March, we will do what we did earlier this year, which is pick a number of pubs in York. They will all have cask Imperial Stouts on, and we create a route across York, and you have a third of every Imperial Stout as you go along. You stamp the card on the map that you're given, and then there's gifts at the end if you get all the way through and try them all. So we're putting through, I think it'll be somewhere in the region of 8 different Imperial Stouts that will all be released. Well, all of those casks will be launched at those pubs on the same day in March, which will be really good.
My birthday's in March. I feel a trip to York coming on. So will subscribers to your subscription service get this beer as well?
Yes. And any subscription member will always get every canned beer that we produce absolutely guaranteed within their subscription. So I believe this will be in the October box.
And how much do people have to pay for that?
Our subscription box is £20 plus shipping. And then each month you'll get 6 beers, one of which is a fresh can of Disco King. The other 5, we try and make as many of them the brand new beers as possible. So you'll never miss out on a Turning Point can if you're a subscriber. And then you'll get a gift alongside that, which could be anything from a bar blade to a web store discount to an invitation to the Disco Royalty Day, which we do once a year and get all our subscription members to the tap room.
£20 for 6 beers is some bargain, isn't it? Especially when this is one of them.
Oh, yeah, especially when it's a 12% Imperial Stout, definitely.
So, Dave, are we agreed? Are we all aboard the hype train?
Yes.
There's
no hesitation with this, and it wouldn't have mattered if Josh was here or not. It is just a very good beer. I wouldn't have said anything differently were you not here.
Yep, same
I
here.
stand by that. It's a very, 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 very good beer. Very different. Stands out from the crowd. Shows that you can do different things with a genre which is being a bit overdone at the moment.
Thank you very much for your kind words.
Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast.
Well, that's just about a lot for this episode of Daftaboutcraft. Thanks so much for tuning in and listening to me and Dave and our guests. Really appreciated you joining us. We will be back in 3 weeks' time. So check us out, episode 36, available to stream and download on Monday, October the 24th. See you then. Cheers.